What's happening, Kansas City Underground?
I want to start with a confession.
Confess.
Is that
it was the most dramatic change in my whole life.
we are stepping into the next subject of this larger series about urban disciple-making movement characteristics.
I think it would be fair to say they're stepping into it, the listener.
The listeners are stepping into...
Or the viewer now.
Or the viewer. That's right, if you're seeing us on YouTube. The next topic, which is we need mobilizing the local church, right? Within movements, within urban movements, within cities, like there's always some kind of mobilization or partnership with like the current church structure. We're not starting usually with like completely unengaged, unreached cultures.
I don't know if I'm supposed to look at you or like look at
keep
you.
looking up and down at us. We're facing each other. It's very hard.
We're still getting used to it. Like 18 episodes later.
The confession is that we've already done all the interviews.
We have.
And so we're circling back and doing the introduction interview to the point that we just recorded what will be the last one, which was Pete Kerwin. And so I suggested to Brian that we just switch shirts because like I'm clearly wearing the same thing. And he didn't like that idea, and I'm trying to figure out why. Well, let's talk about that before we dive into this.
It's a crew neck, and I always feel like I'm choking.
Just a regular crew neck? Choking?
Yeah, I'm just like, I
interesting.
Can't stand it.
Yeah.
It's like,
is it so because people can't see the tattoo?
It's really not about that.
I
just don't like crew necks. People can't see it now.
I got another thing to say before we keep going.
Okay.
Is that intern Caden is with us again. I guess this is the first time. So Caden is in the room, and much like other podcasts where there's the random person on the side and you might hear laughing or talking, that's Caden today. So Caden, that camera. There he is. Cool.
It's the second time you've had to do that.
I did that twice.
You're really good at it. Yeah.
Yeah, I suggested Caden that we switch shirts, and he didn't want to either. So I don't know what's going on
You're
here.
getting really weird about this. All right. 248. Here's the observation. This is observation number 8. And today probably won't be a super long episode because we're going to talk about this for 4 more weeks.
We always say that, and then it's always just as long. But yeah, that's the goal.
Also, I don't want it to be too long, though, because I think we've said a lot of stuff in the other podcasts that are like, if we say too much of it now, it's like, oh, gosh, we're really hammering it. So here's the observation, because for you, the viewer or listener, you haven't heard it at all. So observation number 8, urban churches must refocus on disciple-making and engaging the lost. Now, again, this feels weird to me because I think everybody would be like, well, we totally focus on disciple-making. You know what I mean? Like, this is not I don't think people are, I don't know. This is something I've been pondering lately. It's like we keep hammering like disciple-making. Exponential conference coming up in a few weeks. Their whole deal is like 180. We're focusing on disciple-making, which I love because it's sort of an admission of we haven't been. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I think normal like church leaders are like, no, that's what I've been focusing on. I'm just, I don't know. So and assuming that they're accomplishing it.
So maybe that the first step of this conversation is defining what at least 248 is referencing as what is disciple making.
Yeah, I think we should talk about that. Okay. So let me finish doing the quick overview.
If you're taking notes, number 1, we need to talk about disciple making. Okay.
We've observed that fruitful urban disciple making churches appear to adapt. We took the pop filter off and you still hit it.
I had to reach for my water.
All right, we've observed that fruitful urban disciple making churches appear to adapt existing or traditional church models away from, here's the long phrase, central, Sunday gravitational, single meeting place, attendance-based membership structures, and toward decentralized, full week, adaptable gathering place, disciple-making, outward-focused structures. So many of those that we interviewed are either currently in a church environment that is focused on the values above or actively working with the leadership to pivot in that direction. So that second set of values. So many of those we interviewed have spoken about the challenges of existing church structures. They're expensive. They're non-reproducible. They're confusing. They're hierarchical. Both words that mean something slightly different.
And with your accent, it's somewhere in between both of those words. So.
As clear obstacles are hindrances to the call on the church to preach the gospel to all creation and to make disciples of all nations. Some have had to make difficult decisions to leave their previous church communities to have the time and the freedom to pursue effective city disciple making. And that would be
us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah, like, what are we saying here? We have to mobilize the existing church. So ultimately, I think we've been going through a bit of not a paradigm shift, but a paradigm clarification of, like, we know what we're called to do, but, man, we just long to engage the whole church of Kansas City, which means we need to work really well with existing structures and not just, snub them, talk bad about them, elevate their voice. They have a role. They're man, this is beautiful. Yeah. Let me say this, and then I'll let you talk some. I haven't really. You've been leaning in.
Beautiful too. It might be the V-neck.
I was on a call this morning before we started recording, and we just did some corporate listening prayer around the idea of gospel saturation. So we held up this word together, this phrase. What does gospel saturation mean? How does it influence us? And we just sat in silence and let the voice of the Spirit just begin to speak to us. And then, like, corporately, what are we hearing? And this one person on the call is this beautiful picture of her city, and she said there were a bunch of different faucets. And there were little ones and really big ones. And I'm not doing it justice the way that she was describing it, but, like, she was saying, like, the existing church, like, they have a faucet. Each of these churches, they were pouring water into the city. And they have influence, and they're doing things there. And I was like, man, it's just a reminder. It's like, even if it's not my way or my preferred way, it's still a part of what the Lord is accomplishing.
Yeah, that's
So how do we work together?
Yeah, I agree. That is beautiful. And the V-neck, while you're it makes it even more beautiful, bro. Yeah. It is a hard conversation because we're talking, in one sense, we're talking about structures.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Like, in another sense, we're just talking about DNA. Are we saying mobilize the local church? Are we talking about church like
when we say church,
like when we say it, or are we talking about church like the structures? And I think the answer is yes.
Right.
And we're at this point, I think, of a lot of creativity. So let's use a couple, maybe examples. Later, we're going to interview people that have some form of hybrid church, where in one sense they're still operating, in a certain way of doing kind of the Sunday-centric, some of the words that were described here. Yeah. Sunday gravitational, single meeting place, attendance-based, memberships, structures.
Right.
Yada, yada, yada. Right. In some ways, people they're creating new structures where you're operating that way, but then you have a whole other pathway that kind of looks like these other words that they're saying. Decentralized, full week, adaptable gathering place, disciple making, outward focused structures. Right? So they're operating in both ways. So you're going to hear some examples. Roy Moran's going to talk about that. Pete Kerwin, locally in Kansas City, are going to talk about that. Then you got crazy people like Kansas City Underground, where we were like, okay, what if we just start from scratch and create a missions organization that is fully set up to live in this other structure? We have our own issues, and we've got other things that we're trying to wrestle with and trying to figure out. But like those are two kind of structural paradigm conversations to have that I think we're going to unpack a little bit over the next few weeks. So stay tuned about some ideas. Also, Marco in South Africa is going to talk a little bit about his story and what they've tried, and in many ways a similar setting. Yeah, it's African, but it's also it's urbanized, it's westernized in some capacity. So it's just it'll be interesting to hear some of his conversation. But either way, we got to mobilize the church.
Yeah.
Like the people of God, we have to mobilize for disciple making out there.
That is a unique sort of take on it that I think I don't think I was able to fully verbalize what I was feeling of, like, man, this is such a tricky one to really talk about, because when we say the church, we have been reparadigmed around, like, the Church of Kansas City. People that have surrendered their life to the Lordship of Jesus, that are moving from unbelief to belief in Jesus. They might go to a building on Sunday and call it their church, but like we just say they're a part of the Church of Kansas City. And we want to mobilize that church. But we also do want to work with local structures and organizations that are called the church. I'm not trying to be weird about it, but it is it's challenging because words create worlds. Yeah. We need to talk about the disciple-making piece. And also just this like potential strategy thing here. I'm trying to think through like, man, I wanna go to this, some friends of mine at this local church, and I wanna invite them to be a part of what we're doing. And I think the best way is to help them understand observation number 8 from 248. You need to refocus on disciple making.
Yeah.
Like it just feels like boom.
Yeah.
In your face, like you're doing it wrong. You know what I mean?
Yeah, but okay, Caden, right, number 2. Figure out a nice way of saying you need to refocus on disciple making. Well, let's just zoom out. We talk about disciple making in terms of the Great Commission. I'm sure we've said this 10 times on this podcast. When Jesus is gathering the 11 remaining disciples and gives them the Great Commission of go and reach everywhere, everyone with the good news, and make disciples, right? And among other cool things he says. The question I like to sit and ask is are disciples, are they already believers? Like the people that they're reaching? And the answer is no, right? They're not. So disciple making in the very like pure Jesus way of talking about it is going to it's directly coupled with evangelism. It's on that same spectrum. Is like you're proclaiming, living the good news, you're reproducing new disciples, and they don't yet know Jesus. It is evangelistic. Disciple making is not taking the Christians in your church and making them better Christians or making them more knowledgeable Christians. Or at least that I don't think is what Jesus is talking about. I think what Jesus is saying, it's coupled new. When we say disciple making in this context, we are talking about what are the things that they we're talking about decentralized, full week, adaptable gathering place, disciple making, outward focused structures. Like we're talking
those are
about
structures though too.
Yeah. Okay, so take out structures.
Because I'd push back on what you just said.
I know you are, and I'm excited for this conversation. but I've got the Bible backing me up, so I'm excited to and especially Jesus' words. No, but that's what we're talking about is disciple making out there among people who don't yet know Jesus. That's the structure. When we say they need to refocus on disciple making and engaging the lost, that's what the refocus is on.
Yes. I would say within the church, though, you can't discount these people. And I think you can, inside those structures, make disciples if you understand disciple making in light of all people moving from unbelief to belief in Jesus in every area of their life.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
They already know. There are people that already know and are surrendered in those structures, though. And in my neighborhood or in Share the Hope or in any network. I'm not really disagreeing with you. I'm just nuancing it to say, like, as you're going, make disciples.
Well, maybe let's just compare it. Yes, but let's compare
whether they already know me. I want them to move closer to me in this broken area of their life.
100% in that. Like I think we agree on that. But let's just think you walk into an average church building, and people that we love in the city, we partner with the city. But still, I'm just trying to paint like an actual picture. And I walk into maybe the church building, and there's probably there might be something on the wall, might be a vision statement, might even be
there probably is a vision statement.
Yeah, but there's probably even a process. Like I've seen this in a lot of churches lately. And okay, what's our process? You gather here, okay, and then you get connected, and then you volunteer, or you become a small group leader, or and then and it's usually some kind of pathway, become a member, whatever. These aren't bad. But generally speaking, when we're talking about mobilizing the church to refocus on disciple making, we're not talking about that.
Yeah.
We're talking about out here, like disciple making and engaging the lost, and that's why they couple those two things together.
Yeah.
Is like we're actually trying to help people refocus out here.
Missionally.
Disciple making among the lost, among the people who aren't here. And that in and of itself is a giant crazy paradigm shift, but if we're going to see movement in urban settings, we've seen how important that is. We have to do that in some capacity. I think that's what we're observing here.
Yeah, totally. I certainly agree with that. I think that the heartbeat behind the purpose of the study is like, how are we pushing people out? How are we thinking about movement, not just adding people to an existing structure? Yep. So there's some work to be done. So I guess we could answer my question in a minute about like how do we approach the existing church to do that. But here's why they suggest it's fruitful. Here are the results of the survey that people are like, well, this is what it's yielded. These partnerships can lead to a wider and more diverse movement of disciple making. In other words, there's already a bunch of faith communities, and there's already people just waiting to be given permission or helped to move into this. Like, let's go there, and let's engage what is already right in front of us. So cities already often have a Christian presence. The existing church has established networks and relationships. And in some ways, it's almost like they're saying the local church in that structure and form is a person of peace in a way. Like there's a network behind them.
Yeah.
And you can engage whatever network they're already
a lot of
working.
influence over a lot. Even if it's 10% of the people that are coming to their churches,
Yeah.
you potentially have a lot of disciple makers waiting.
And a lot of these local churches are also doing missional work. They're doing it in a centralized way.
Yeah.
But like we go here and we do this thing. It was like, well, we have 8 people doing that thing. You know, like you're focused on this one area of maybe relief work with homeless people. And it's like, well, the underground has these people that have micro churches among the homeless people. It's not just relief work, it's like development work. Like we got both ends of that. How can we partner together? So leverage those networks. Disciple making practitioners can reach a greater number of people. So that's one way of thinking it. The local church can be a quote unquote person of peace. B, this is a good response to an opportune moment in history. Forced disruptions, pandemics, and other significant global events have caused much of the church to rethink its resilience on expensive and non-reproducible components and structures to get back to its primary functions. So interesting. We just interviewed Pete, who shares all about, essentially, B was, he's giving a very direct reference to B. It was like the pandemic did this to our congregation, our faith family, and the result was we got to pivot.
Yeah.
As a response to the perceived ineffectiveness of our established church within our cities toward its mission, many Christians are frustrated and are seeking new ways to be effective within their existing church paradigms and sometimes without it. So, I mean, these are super helpful to think about, and I think we highlight these throughout these 4 interviews as well.
Absolutely. That last one jumps out to me. I think frustrated, there's different levels of frustration. You know, there are people that are just angry. In all honesty, I don't actually want to walk with the Christians that are just super angry,
right?
Because then you just get so negative. But there are definitely levels of just something ain't right. You know, like the discontented. You know, I mean, sitting here with Caden, and I wish you had a microphone right now, but like, that's one idea, right? Is like, hey, I'm involved in a church and it's great, but I have a hunger to go reach people who don't know Jesus and even don't know how to do that within this structural setting, right? Like, I want to like find those people, and we want to mobilize them strategically, or just come alongside and just fan the flame of like, yeah, what God is doing in you is actually really cool.
Yeah,
and there are people in these like that. We're not starting from scratch. We are not usually we're not in an unreached or unengaged people group, but we have to absolutely start from scratch, even though sometimes that's really fun and that DNA, but like we have all these potential believers. How are we mobilizing them? I think what you'll see in the next few weeks is various ideas, you know, experiments, including what we've done with Underground, but just experiments on how to do that to reach a city that's as complex as 2.3 million people in Kansas City. Like, we can't just have one answer, but we can have a way of disciple making that can permeate, you know, maybe, I don't know, structures, or at least like structures become the launch pad to get more people out there living in that way of. And I think we're going to find more and more creative experiments, structurally at least, organizationally, to actually do that.
It's very interesting to record an intro. This is like a prequel. We're like filming the prequel.
I kind of like it.
There's
like
part of me
the
that
answers.
Yeah, I do like that. Anyway, one of the things that we highlight, I think, pretty well over the next 4 weeks. This is like something to be aware of that I want to say, but also maybe talk about it just for a brief moment here. It's like these 4 weeks are probably going to feel like we're talking to church leaders a lot, except for the interview with Suze. Yeah. Which is probably the best.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Also,
that's my wife, by the way, in case you don't know. This first time we got to interview my wife and some of her cool story, and it's a little different flavor. It's like, how have you been personally mobilized, and what does that look like on the ground? She talks a lot about prayer, in particular, how God has mobilized her in prayer.
Also, for the next 2 weeks, we recorded those before we were doing video.
That's
so
right.
Sorry.
So what does that look like on YouTube? They just like see
it's just a black screen.
Oh man.
But anyway, 3 out of the 4 are going to really feel like, how does this apply to me? But somewhere along the way, we try to pull up like, what does this mean for everyday people?
Mm-hmm.
How can this be? So pitch it to you, Corey. What do you think about this whole mobilize the existing church? Everyday leaders are listening to this. So far, a lot of our observations, I feel like, are really good at equipping ordinary people to think through. I can think through servant-hearted leaders in my context.
Mm-hmm.
I can think, whatever some of the other ones were. We've done a lot of talking today.
Yeah.
How does this one apply to the ordinary person? How do they think about this?
Mm-hmm.
How can I go mobilize the existing church? That sounds way bigger than what I need to be doing right now.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's how can I be mobilized? Like, am I living in such a way to be mobilized? Because I think the answer or the question that's probably popping up in a lot of ordinary people is, I kind of like going to the Sunday morning church, even though it frustrates me, or there's varying levels of how much should I participate in what the paradigm I already have in my mind is of what church. I think that's a question we get a lot. We don't have the answer to that. Mm-hmm. I do think if we're going to take a stab at it, though, is like, how are you being most effectively unleashed and deployed to join God where He's got you? And for some of us, I felt this way. Even though it was a great church community I was a part of, I felt like I was too busy and I had too many responsibilities. And this can be, I mean, usually if you're thinking these things and you've been in the church for a while, you probably have already been tapped to be some volunteer, things that take time because you're like, you love Jesus and you're involved and you want to be involved. And so it's like, okay, here are some things to get involved. I just have these conversations a lot where it's like, but I really don't know if like that role within the church is what I'm thinking, but I can't even put my, I can't put my finger on what it is. I just be willing to be mobilized. Mm-hmm. And there's going to probably be a time in your life where that's pretty unclear. Like you don't exactly know what that looks like. There's that like jumping into the mystery, but man, it's worth it. It's fun.
Yeah,
it's
totally.
crazy. And to church leaders, create structures to help people do that, to actually mobilize. And I think that's really what we're leaning in more. As you said, that's more of the flavor of the next few weeks.
Yeah. I think, too, that it's important to say just in this intro episode, for those listening looking for like the nugget for today, I don't know, maybe you heard something. But if not, I think for us, it's been good. I think we were already moving in this direction, but a highlight for us together having this conversation is like, man, I do have like a growing sense of how we realize John 17, mm-hmm. that unity in the church. Mm-hmm. I don't think we can make it happen, but I think that we have a longing for that reality. Mm. I don't know where this episode is dropping date-wise, but like one of the things that's coming up is 1,000 Fires. So we did this a couple years ago, re-engaging it as an opportunity to collaborate with a whole bunch of churches in Kansas City, potentially just to pray together for 4 or 5 days. Mm-hmm. So extended ongoing prayer. That's a way to mobilize the existing church. Yeah. That came out of like a space where we were praying together with a group of people on like early morning prayer. But I was with a group of leaders like really early this morning. It was like 3 East African leaders. And our questions were like, it was introduce yourself and then what is God saying and what is God doing? And that was my answer. I was like, I think God is saying now is the time for collaboration. How do we work together? How do we do more of that? And then what he's doing is like, I think a bunch of people are going to say yes to this. And it's going to be a picture of that whole, the Church of Kansas City is working together. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I love that this one is in here. I love that it has emerged as one of the observations for this day and age, especially in a Western context that is very driven towards individualism, competition, owning our share of the market, etc. To go like, we cannot be that. We have to pull that out of any sort of flavor or ideas of that. Again, we've talked about this so much. It's not that you can't be prophetic and speak towards things that might be a bit broken. But any flavor of antagonism or arrogance of we have it the right way is like, no, there's a church of the city and we have a part, but we better be open to like, I don't know, just the fullness of collaboration.
No, that's so good, man. Oh, when we got to fight for it. And man, I'm trying to think if I should say this. I think so. I'll be generic.
I could edit it out.
Okay.
I probably won't, but I could.
There's a hub of the underground that, there's some church leader that has basically called us unbiblical, and that's been hard for that hub in particular to wrestle through. Like, how do you respond with grace?
There's not a hub that called us unbiblical.
No,
there's a local congregation that called
this hub. And so that's like your immediate response as the Kansas City Underground, our big like organization.
The story you're telling was transformational for me on Monday, by the way.
Dude, so maybe
I think you should tell the story, and I shouldn't edit it out because in that moment, I didn't feel any need to defend us. I wanted to defend a person that felt, I was like, I want to come by your side and speak up for you. Mm-hmm. I felt no need to defend us.
Yeah.
But like the response from the team was like, whoa there, big boy. You know what I mean? Like,
oh, yeah.
It was pray blessing and honor over.
Yeah. Like, so that's like, we felt really strongly our response to this particular leader needs, like the leader that's kind of attacking us, is we need to respond by blessing them. Yeah. And when so much of, I think, the natural response for some of us had would be either defending ourselves or just being angry. And there's going to be levels of that, I think, as we fight for unity with the local church. There's going to be those, that's why I call them leaders of peace. There's going to be those leaders of peace in the city that are just hungry for something similar. They may not have the paradigm or the language, but they're hungry for it. They want to see the whole city reached. They're going to, like, all we've known or done might be this particular way, but like, man, they long for it. They're partners, and we're going to sit in multiple worlds, but we're going to figure this out together. We're going to be friends, and we're going to speak well of each other. And there's going to be others that might push against it, and we're going to love and bless and be like, it's okay. We're not going to run with you in that way because you think we're heretics. That's cool.
Yeah,
you know, like, we love you, but we can't get involved in that too. We can't go too deep in those relationships, in a sense.
I feel some need to defend myself now, probably. As I spent time with it, I was like, I don't think I didn't have venom. You know what I mean? It was like a, it was that like
big brother protection.
Yeah. Like I feel this deep love for, so I have anger for this situation.
Totally.
And it was also like, why are we doing this still? You know what I mean? Like that kind of frustration where it's like, no, let's move on, because we've spent so much time trying to like build those bridges. But man, just like hearing the team go like, let's pray for this person. And I was like, I don't think what I was feeling was wrong. I wouldn't back away from it. It was like, it wasn't the whole thing I should have been doing. It was like, I didn't have this other side of also pray blessing into their life. If we're going to train people and equip them to pray blessing prayers, we should do it in the hardest moment.
Yeah. You know? That's good, man. So I mean, various ways of partnership with people. In the end, man, we're going to fight for unity, but not everyone is going to be on the same page. And how do we figure that out? But we've got to see this potential army of disciple makers in the city who already know Jesus, who are already in churches, and we've got to figure out ways to deploy them. Yeah. And that's where this conversation is at. And
I said it was going to go short, and once again it didn't. Because I'm not done yet. That phrase right there, potential disciple makers, like we've called them, because we borrowed the term from Tampa, potential missional Christians.
Yeah.
Like anybody that's surrendered to the lordship of Jesus, you're a disciple, right? Like, are you a disciple maker yet? You have to answer that. But like just that phrase, I love that. It's like just a helpful nuance. I got the potential missional Christian label now. You know? Yeah. Will I step into it or not? The first, I'm going to just go over the questions real quick and we can wrap it up, because the first one is actually helpful for ordinary people listening or watching. Reflect on your personal experience interacting or partnering with other believers in your city. The reason that's important, and maybe we should have jumped here a while ago, was like, just think about your experience in a local church. How often were you invited to partner with others? That's part of the story that should change. I mean, in Kansas City, there's a good story of what if the church of, but it wasn't believers going to other churches during that 3 Sundays where they shared pulpits. Who moved? The pastor.
The pastor.
It's like
guest preachers.
Yeah,
we'd share that, which was cool.
Yeah. Now there's and there was usually some sort of missional kind of push at the end that helped integrate these faith families together. But it's like it was the paid professional that moved, and we didn't get to integrate as faith families. Like, what's your experience, and how do you increase in that? How do you get to know other faith families, experience the way they experience the Lord? How has your team interacted or not with the existing body of Christ in your city? Why has it looked like this? That's a really hard question. And then what does that reveal to you? Last question, are there statements, suggestions, or conclusions here that should influence what we do and what we will do in response? Wrap it up.
Those are great questions, Brian.
I didn't make them up.
Well, I hope you all enjoy the next few weeks diving into the partnership. How do we mobilize the existing church to go be disciple makers out there?